Hi! In this video demonstration, we're going to take a look at particle flow once again here. Only this time we're going to take a look at some of the new particle features of 3D Studio 2014. Before 3D Studio 2014, these same things were available via plugin from Orbaz Technologies, and they were called Particle Flow Toolbox numbers 1, 2, and 3. So what this gives us, we'll go over here in just a moment, but the effect we're going to create today kind of looks something a little along the lines of this. I went a little grotesque here and made a nice rotting skin, but we'll play this here. And we'll see, a peel-away effect using some of the new tools as of 2014 that 3D Studio now has packaged. I said before that these were called Toolbox 1, 2, and 3. Now in 3D Studio they come along with the whole just basic package of 3D Studio here, and they are called Mparticles. You may notice if you've got 3D Studio 2014 or later, you'll see the Mparticles, and you'll see a lot of MP new operators going on in here. So we're going to use those as well as a couple of other new tools, and what that's going to give us is the ability to create particles that now pay attention to mass effects. So we've got physics and particles working together hand in hand. We also have the ability to do some new caching stuff as well as data operators, which allow us to plan specific mathematical actions that can take place in a single operator. So in order to get going, we're going to shred a sphere here today. I'm going to create a different kind of sphere to start us off with. I'm going to use a box to begin. I'm going to create this box in my top view. Doesn't matter the size yet. We're going to jump over to the Modify tab and we'll put in our own sizes here. And I'm going to go with, let's go 75, 75, 75, length, width, and height all the way down just so it's perfectly square. And let's add 10 segments in each. I'm doing it this way for a specific reason, which I will get to in a moment, and I'll tell you a little bit more why I chose to do it this way. Once you have a box with 10 segments in each, we're going to go ahead and add a Spherify modifier to it, which, in all apparent reason, gives us our sphere shape, only we don't have the triangles at the top, nor do we get that nice kind of bunched up vertice collection up near the top of the ring. If I create a regular sphere, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Up at the top, we get not only triangles, but one particle, and then a whole lot that are really close together here. And that'll kind of mess us up when we're dealing with particles that have hand-in-hand to do with physics. So I didn't want that, so instead I've got this made out of all quads, this sphere that nothing has the vertices too close to each other to get crowded in any way. I want to make sure that that sphere is sitting just slightly above the z-axis. I'm going to zero out x and y so that it's dead center. And then maybe we'll put it at 1z just to give ourselves a little bit of room to work with here. And then I'm going to rename our box 1. I'm going to rename it our collision. Collision underscore object. Something along the lines of that so that we've got this descriptive thing, and this is what our particles are going to actually kind of bounce off of as they pull and rip and tear. Once we've got this guy, we're going to right-click on this sucker and choose Clone from our quad menu. We want to make a copy, not an instance, and this time we're going to call it our emitter. Okay, with our emitter selected, we want more particles here. So I'm going to go back down our modify stack here. And I'm going to actually change each of these to 20 rather than 10, because we're going to want particle at every vertex on this, giving us a nice webbing across the surface of this box. Okay, what we're also going to do is down here in the box, I'm going to change our 75s to 76s, just to give us some leeway, since these need to kind of fly backward and bounce off of the surface. You might notice that it kind of pushes up rather than out. I can use my Align tool here, right there, to kind of zoom in, click the Align tool, then click our original sphere, the collision object, and we'll tell it to center at the X, the Y, and the Z axis, and then say OK, and that'll center it around so that our collision is a little smaller than our emitter object on the inside, so they have a chance to fly backwards and bounce off of this sucker. Then we're going to take the emitter object, we're going to right click on it again to bring up that quad menu, and we're going to clone it yet a third time. Again, we want to copy, and we'll rename this one our skin. That's the one we're going to actually end up peeling off in the final result. To the skin version of our sphere, we've now got 3 spheres: collision, object, emitter, and skin. To the skin object, we're going to add a tessellate modifier, which is then going to just break this up into even smaller chunks. The smaller, the more polygons you have, the better this effect will look in the end. Then I'm going to select that skin object. I'm just going to right click and hide selection. And I'm going to leave the other 2 out here to get us going for right now. Okay, now that we've done that, we are pretty much about ready to start our particles. Let's go ahead and hit 6 to open up Particle View. Particle View will not open up unless you have the keyboard shortcut override toggle depressed here. That's what turns on the 6 on your keyboard to open Particle View. If for some reason that's not working for you, you can always get to it via Graph Editor's Particle View, and it'll open up the same window. All right, to get us going, we're going to start with a standard flow. It's just the easiest way to begin. So we'll take this Mparticles flow and just drag it out of our depot down here into our staging area where we can start work on our effect. The PF source is already set to Viewport 100 with this one because it has to do with physics a little bit more, and it just functions a little bit nicer. You may notice a whole bunch of cubes show up in your viewport when you do this. We're going to get rid of those by changing what defaults us with a birth grid. We're going to actually drag out a regular birth operator and hover over it until we see that red line and then drop it to replace it. I'm also going to come down here to the spin, and I don't need that, so I'll right click and delete. Alright, let's get started here with the birth. We want all of our particles right off the bat, so we're going to set the emit start and the emit stop to 0. This is going to be a little bit more of an advanced particle effect, so if you're not familiar with particle flow, I might feel like I'm going a little fast. You may want to try one of the more easier things to do with particle flow to start, but to continue on, let's kind of just keep moving. We're going to go ahead, we'll leave the amount set as is for right now because we're going to figure something out here. Let's go back and select our emitter. This is what's going to spawn our particles. I need to figure out how many vertices this guy has in total because that's how many particles we want. In order to do this, the easiest way is just to add a modifier to it, the edit poly modifier. Select our vertex subobject here, and just either Control A or drag a selection around all of them, and it'll tell you right down here how many vertices you have selected. I have 2,402. That's the number I need. I can trash the edit poly modifier, don't need it any longer, but I will put 2,402 in the amount right here. Shape, we can leave those as cubes, but we're probably going to want to shrink those quite a bit. Let's try 0.5 there. Since we've got it just a little off the ground by 1, we'll go half that, and I think 0.5 should work. Next, we're going to need to tell these particles where they're allowed to spawn, so we need an operator from down here. We're going to go with a position object, make it fairly simple. You can do a data operator here as well, but the math gets a little bit complicated, and that's just extra time that I don't think we need to worry about for this particular tutorial. If you want to get better at data operators, I definitely recommend learning more about them and how all of that works. Some of it's a little beyond me still, but we'll use the position object here for this one and click on the add and click on our emitter object. You'll see our 2,402 little tiny cubes show up all over the surface of the sphere. We're going to change that. We don't want them on the surface. Instead, let's open up this drop down and choose vertices all, which is why we needed that exact number of vertices to that exact number of particles, because each vertice is going to get its own little square here. Let me just do this so we can zoom in and see it a little bit nicer. And each one of these is spread apart to a distance that None of them are touching. None of them are overlapping, and that's what we want. That's another thing that using that box to create our sphere did for us, rather than to use a regular sphere. If you do this in the future, you'll probably want to do it on an actual model of some sort. Spheres are kind of boring in that case, but for a tutorial, spheres work great. All right, now that we've got a particle at all of our vertices, that shape of the cube, I'm going to put my position object above that just so we emit our particles, then they become the shape here. We can leave the MP shape as box, since we are using boxes for our particles in the first place. And the MP world is fine the way it's at as well. So there we go. We've got our basics and our beginning here. The next thing we want to do is align all of these particles to the surface normals. Right now you can see that we've got these cubes kind of diagonally jutting through and out and around the surface of our sphere. This will work a little bit better if they're kind of all pointed out in the direction of the normals. In the past, we might have done this simply by using a speed by surface and then a rotation modifier, or operator, sorry about that. But this time we're going to actually use data operators in order to accomplish this, this idea. So come down here, we're going to grab the data operator, which is now one of the new ones that comes along with 3D Studio 2014. If you have the earlier versions with the Orbaz tools, pretty sure it says exactly the same thing. It'll be called the data operator, and we'll drag it out underneath, in between, let's say, our shape operator here and our MP shape. That'll work. I like to mark the auto update so that everything kind of changes as we go, and we don't have to remember to click the update button at all. And the data operator allows us to use this edit data flow button here. We'll click it to open up a brand new, almost duplicate of our particle view window with operators, functions, and a flowchart style creation method here. We're going to use these new function operators here to tell the particles to do a specific thing. Most of the time this is kind of math oriented, so I'm going to try and keep my math simple since I'm a bit of a dummy when it comes to this stuff, and have a little bit more of an art-sided mind than a analytical brain. But we'll go ahead and do this. We'll show you how this works. To begin, we're going to need a select object. So let's drag that out to get us going. Select object is, we start with those an awful lot using these data operators. It's going to allow us to choose an object in our scene that then we're going to modify the rest of this to reposition our particles based on. If I go ahead and select this, we'll see the single object here. I'll click none. I'm going to select the emitter from my scene as the object that we start with here. Okay, then we're going to need to define some terms. We'll use geometry, and we want to tell our particles to rearrange themselves and point outward based on the normals of this sphere. How the light is kind of bouncing off the surface is going to determine how the direction our particles all face. So with this geometry thing here, we're going to go up to the drop-down menu, and we are going to choose point normal. There it is. We want to point our particles in the direction of the normal. This gives us two other little nodes. There's a little bit more complicated stuff going on in this one, which means we're going to need two inputs for this. The first one is orange. We can go ahead and attach those together. Orange to orange, pink to pink, purple to purple, so on and so on. But we're going to need another set of data as well to tie into this in order to tell it to point these normals in the proper direction. What we're going to need is to tell it to look at the closest point of this sphere that it can reach. So we're going to drag another geometry over here. Instead of closest object by surface, we're going to set it to closest point by surface. It's going to find the closest point of the surface of our sphere emitter here and use the normal at that specific location to then point out and go through this data operator. We're going to tie in our emitter. We'll have two arrows pointing that, both orange. And then this one will give us a nice pink one that we can attach into there. Then we need to tell the normals to do something, and this something is going to be reposition each of these particles z-axis based on the information we just fed it. So we are going to take out a function, which is mathematical sounding, I know, terrifies me as well. And we'll go ahead and change the value here from, we'll leave the vector here, but the second one we want will be a matrix. We're going to change the vector to a matrix and send it on out along its way. What we want the function to do is to align our particles z-axis to the new vector, vector 1. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And then we'll go ahead and attach the kind of purple-pink one to the purple-pink node here. In order to do that, again, we have another input here that we need to add something else, which is going to be the original matrix. We're taking the normals and the original matrix together, converting that matrix to a new vector and sending it on out to a new direction. So what we're going to need is going to be a input standard. We use the, there it is, input standard. We can take this, and we've got a lot of things to set this to. We want to set it to a matrix, as we need here. That's what the M stands for. We need a matrix in order to complete our function. So we'll set it to TM matrix, and then we can connect these guys together. Takes the current matrix, takes the normal pointed the correct direction, turns the z-axis into a new vector that we then send out through here. Fun, right? Yeah. All right, the last thing that we're going to need, again, is going to be another matrix. We're going to realign it and then send out a new matrix. So we're going to go ahead with not an input standard this time. We want it to be the end of our new function, our parameters here. So we're going to take an output standard. We'll set this output standard to TM for the matrix and send it on out. So we've got our object, and this will be our input. We've collected data. We've told the data to change based on what it was, change to something new, and then output it in through this data operator to continue on down. Gets a little complicated, I know, but hopefully you were able to follow along with that. If not, that's what the rewind button's for, right? All right. Exit out of there, and now we've got our data operator. It's a good idea because sometimes you're going to be using quite a few of these to go ahead and rename that data operator. I like to leave data operator there so I know what kind of operator it was in the first place, but then I might say realign to normals or something along those lines. Okay? You should notice now that all of our particles, all the boxes, are facing outward from the sphere now according to the specific normals that we've got going on. So a little cleaner, a little nicer than trying to get one to follow the right rotation using speed by surface or something like that. It's a little bit more clean, and the particles aren't traveling anywhere. They stay put. That's really nice. You also have the option to save these presets. You can give the presets a name and everything, say OK, and then later on you can load these guys out of here to whatever kind of presets you happen to have. Aligned to normals, I've got one saved for right there. I'll go ahead and cancel, and that'll keep what we had done just the way it was. All right, next thing we're going to need is a collision modifier. Right now, if we go ahead and scrub through, we see our particles just get born and then start falling. Right now they have nothing to tell them to stay put, nothing to tell them to do any sort of movement, but they are assigned a gravity, which if we go down to our MP world, and it's already created a driver for us. It's the MP world 002. And click the little arrow, it'll show up. You can also click the icon, which is that weird wireframe box there. And it'll show that we've got a gravity applied, as well as the option to collide with the ground plane that's already there, which is where our grid is. So that's why our particles will fall and then stop as soon as they hit the ground. Physics already working, we can tell it's working, but we need to tell them to both collide with a certain object so that they don't fall through it, as well as to do a whole lot of other stuff, which we will get to. So our next thing is going to be add a collision. There is a new way. We can't just go ahead and add our regular collision operators down here because we need the ones that are going to work with our M particles. There's a new operator here, a new test called the MP collision. We're going to go ahead and add one of these guys up underneath our MP world there. And then if you hit the by list button on this one, you'll notice there's nothing in our list to select. It's because instead of using our good old-fashioned Space Warps deflectors, this one uses objects. And these objects have to have a specific modifier assigned to them, otherwise it won't add up, it won't work. So we've got our, if you can select it, get your collision object that we made. That was the first sphere that we made. Probably easiest to go up to your select by name. That's this guy right up here. And select your collision object. Go to your modify tab, and we're going to add the P-Flow collision shape world space modifier. That's this guy right here. I like to tell it to smooth the surface because if you don't, it gets all faceted, and I don't know, I just find that ugly. It doesn't really change anything, but it's going to use the surface of our original sphere as a deflector this way. All we have to do is click the activate button. Once we've added that modifier and turned it on, our MP collision back over here that now says nothing in our deflectors list, if we click the by list, that collision object will show up, and now we can go ahead and add it. Now if I scrub forward, you'll notice that the spheres are hitting our collision object, which is a little smaller than our original object, and sliding off rather than falling straight through. So that'll help us as we try to kind of collide these particles as they blow backwards in all sorts of crazy ways as well. The next thing we want to do is create a texture to send these guys into another event. The collision can stay put as is and everything, but what we want to do is test for a specific change using another data operator. And this data operator is going to be a specific one. It's going to be a data test. So we're going to come down here to our tests, and we'll drop it up underneath our MP collision. And before we go any further in defining our data, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this because we need to make ourselves a texture. We're going to do this based on a texture, a grayscale change from black to white. And as these particles notice that the texture underneath them has changed from black to white, then they're going to be activated or sent on into a new event that tells them they're allowed to fly away, peel off, etc. In order to do that, we need a texture. So, M, open up our material editor. And we are going to create a texture for our particles to respond to. We'll just go ahead and use the standard textures here. And inside our diffuse slot, go ahead and click that button there to add a gradient ramp from our maps and our standard maps. As we've done a couple of times in a couple of other of our tutorials here, we've used the gradient ramp to make things go invisible, or we've used the channel to spawn certain things, some grass or some sort of change in texture. We're going to do the same thing with these little handles here. We've got three, one that's white, one that's black, and one that's kind of a grayscale right in the middle there. What we want to do is animate these things kind of sliding back to forth to create a change that kind of creeps over our entire sphere. Let's go ahead and grab our emitter and add a modifier to it. The modifier is going to be just the simple old UVW map modifier. And I'm going to tell it to use the shrink wrap modifier here. That'll give us a set of UVW coordinates for our texture to creep over and change. Back in my gradient here, I'm going to go ahead and set the interpolation method from linear to solid so that we don't have to add too many more little tabs here at all. And then I'm going to double click on that tab in the middle and change it all the way to white. Okay. Now that I've got that set up, I am going to turn on my auto key at frame 0. I want to move this guy to be all black, or at least mostly black, here at position 99. And then we'll move on down the road, maybe all the way to 100. Oh, I probably should have turned my particles off. Computer croaking. We can do that if we jump back into particle flow. Just click the light bulb there to turn them off so that we don't have to worry about them while we're doing animation for our texture here. Clear over at 100. I'm just going to simply move that all the way over to position 1. Position 1. And we will see this happen. In our texture here, we'll notice the line, kind of a scan line thing happening there. Perfect. We'll go ahead and turn off auto key, apply this to our emitter, and turn on that thing. Here's what's going to happen. From the bottom to the top, it looks like it's going to engulf all of our sphere there. It's a straight line. That's just not going to work for us, so let's add a little bit of noise, maybe 0.2. We can get a little creative with turbulence, and we can either increase or decrease the size however we want to kind of get a little ragged edge there. Maybe even a 0.3 and a size of 0.5, and we've got some leeway as to how our scan is going to look like it's kind of tearing away all by itself. That'll work for us between 0 and 100. Because it's ending at 100, let's go ahead and give ourselves a time configuration button down here. Let's give ourselves another, let's go to 200 end time for right now. And that gives us plenty. We can always reduce it or start it up later. So this is how our particles are going to be released. As this turns from black to white, the particle will be activated and sent into another event. Now that we've got this at our disposal, we'll jump back right into particle flow, and we can go ahead and design out our new data flow inside our data test. Since this one's a test, I'm going to hit the auto update. This one's a test, so it's looking for a specific set of changes before it allows it to continue on through this node into a new event. In order to see that new event, we're just going to kind of, let's go ahead and put this back at 0, turn our particles back on, and we can see this event by our geometry color. Let's change this to something brighter like yellow so we can see it. All our cubes will be yellow, and then we'll add a new display down here and attach that node through there, and we'll turn that to geometry, and then change this to something, I don't know, bright and bold like maybe red. So it'll change from yellow to red, since that's the only change in our second event that we have for it. To get the data test going, let's go. We can rename it. We can call it our color data test. And we're going to go ahead and hit that data flow, open up that same new window here with our new functions down here that we can change. Once again, we need to start off with that select object. Start with an object, change the data around, and send it out through an output test down here. This object, we're going to go ahead and select the emitter as well, since that's what we put the texture on. And then we need to send it to a couple more functions here. We're going to start with, again, we're going to use the geometry to get going. And what we want to do is, this time, we want to select the point color. So whatever color it is, that's what it's going to say, okay, we've got our object. Let's take a look at the color of our object. Again, we have 2 nodes to feed data through. So we also want, again, another geometry over here, which is going to be, again, our closest point by surface. So it's going to take the color of the closest point of the surface of this sphere. Again, we're going to feed our orange node into both of those, and then back into change the color. It's going to take the closest point by the surface, the color from it, from that object, from this point on the surface. Okay. After that, we're going to need a conversion or a convert down here. And what we want to do is convert this from vector to real. Length is fine. We can actually go ahead and leave that there. Honestly, this actually gets created by itself if you want to see that. But we need it because this needs to be converted into a value that the next thing can read. So we'll just go ahead and add that in on our own, just so that it's clear how we do this. Maybe I'll show you in a moment how it'll kind of force feed itself anyway. After the vector, we're going to need a condition. In other words, the condition that we allow it to change to. Let's add that up here. our condition is going to go from the real, if it's going to take the value of our sphere. Right now we're using the value scale of black to white. So when it becomes, let's say A is 0.5 or 50%, so it's going to say when it gets to a gray value of 50% between black and white, then it's going to allow it to move on down the chain to another command there. So we're going to go with is greater than value A at 0.5, and then we'll connect this guy. Last but not least, we're going to need our output test. Since we did use a data test in the beginning, and this is going to test for the correct change and then let it go right on through there. So our output test is going to be exactly what it is. We don't need to say if it's true, then let it through. There we go. When you've got all three of these, just down, 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 you can always kind of drag them up and drop them in to the same thing to clear up some real estate on your computer screen there. Okay, then we can go ahead and X out of it. This is going to be our data test. Let's see how it works. If I go ahead and, let's go ahead and actually to our world, and let's turn off apply gravity and ground collision for right now, just so that we get a better idea of what's going on. As the value changes, so does the color of our particles here. You'll see going on now. All right. All right, perfect. We can do a little bit more work on our texture. You'll notice that because our texture had a little bit of white to begin with, we could do a little bit more on that. But I think for this, we can leave it as is. What you'd want to do is basically animate the color, let's say, of our sphere. If I take that first keyframe there and move it over to maybe frame 3 there. And then frame 1, we can turn our auto key back on, and this guy, I can double click the end tab and color it black. Click this guy and turn it black since we got it set to solid. And then move it over to that next frame, and then this guy can be set to white again. And then we get that kind of change to start from black. Oops. This guy should also be black from 0. We can actually just delete that. We don't need it. So black, and then you'll see those guys pop up, and then it'll kind of continue back on through to the end where we can do something similar. Again, if I did this, I should probably have turned my particles off so my system doesn't have to think about it, but that's okay. So here at frame 101, we'll have our last one change to a value of white. We'll scoot back one, and that last one will change right back to a value of black. And then at the end, it'll finish that little extra bit at the end off. Turn off our auto key, and we're done. Oh, computer must think. Okay, go back to frame 0 here. So okay, we know it's working. We see these guys turning to red as the texture changes to white and grabs one of them as close as it can. Okay, there we go. The next thing we need to tell these guys to do, we're going to have to add a force here that's going to change things. Our force is going to be a wind in this case. So I'm going to go over to our Create tab here and over to my Space Warps button, and from the drop down select Forces if you don't have them there already. I'm going to minimize this and this, and I'm going to create myself a wind. I'm going to go to my front view and click to drag out the wind icon. In my side view, I will move this thing forward. I'm going to get my rotate tool. Since it's pointing the direction I don't need it pointing, I need it pointing backwards, and turn on my angle snap because that makes life a lot easier. And I'm just going to rotate it 180 to point the other direction. Maybe even give it a little bit of click to turn, just slightly slanted upwards so we can blow our particles up and back. I'm going to create 2 winds, as a matter of fact. The first one's going to blow our particles straight back, The second wind I'm going to create is going to be that of the spherical variety. So I'm going to click wind and then I'm going to mark it spherical. And then kind of right in the middle of our sphere, I'm just going to make a spherical wind. With my move tool, I can guarantee that it's right in the middle there. Even use my align tool to align it to the middle of our sphere. And that's going to blow them away from the surface a bit. So we'll get these ones blowing straight back, but rather than clunking into everything, we'll get it kind of almost like peeling back, and this one will push it out and then back. So we get that kind of arced motion, which arcs in animation are always better. Okay, let's go to our Modify tab. I don't think that the strength for our spherical wind needs to be quite that powerful. Maybe 0.6 rather than full 1 on. Icon size, make it anything you like, doesn't really matter. And then our other wind, we'll go ahead and we can leave it at strength 1 for now. If it's a little too fast, we can always reduce or increase or anything else that we need later on. Now that we've got our 2 winds, we'll go right back into our particle view, where we need to add where we would normally add a force operator, this guy right here, but now we're working with Mparticles, so we have a second force operator specific to our Mparticle force here. So let's add that one in here. Inside this one, we'll go ahead by the Buy List button up here and let's add in both of our winds. Okay, now we'll see that as the red is activated, they should also start responding to our force. One thing I might have done, I need to go back to my physics world and turn on apply gravity, perhaps. Okay, not quite what I had in mind there, and we'll turn on our ground collision plane again. And let's see what's happening here. What am I doing wrong? Could be all kinds of stuff. Just for the hell of it, let's go ahead and we need to copy our physics world, because that's probably one reason we're having trouble. Our world up here is not down here, which means it doesn't have to listen to physics, our physics engine anymore. If I hold down Shift and get that little plus sign on my mouse cursor, I can shift and drag it down to just above the MP force. Not a copy. We always want only one driver for our world, so let's make it an instance of the same one. Let's see if that helps. They're all still falling down. And they're blowing back now. Okay, good. That's okay. They're falling down in this event, and they're blowing back in this event. That's why we're getting kind of double thing. But as long as the wind is being affected now, the next thing we are going to do is glue our particles both together and to our objects so that that doesn't happen up here. We're going to use a switch operator to tell it to when to let go, when it's allowed to go ahead and let go. The MP switch is important when you're kind of going from two different things, two different events, and two different physical movements and motions and all that good stuff. So we're going to put that MP switch right up underneath between our MP shape and our MP world. And we're going to tell it to hold or match the position of the speed and the rotation of our particles. We're also going to tell it to apply anti-gravity in this event, so the first event. So all of our particles are going to stay put until they're actually activated now. And now we're seeing just the red particles blow in the breeze, see, and the yellow particles stick around. It's okay, that works really pretty good. And now we need to play with one more thing that comes with box 2 and or our Mparticles here, which is the glue operators. Some of my favorites, as a matter of fact. We've got the MP glue test up here. We've got our MP collision. Let's put our MP glue test up underneath the collision and play around with some of the glue options. Let's zoom in here so we can see some of the changes with our wireframe as well. And one of the first things we've got here in our glue operator is a type. We've got 3 types to choose from. Simplified, which is the most basic. Rigid, which is going to give you a little bit less flexibility between particles. Kind of holds a more rigid surface. We can get some good things with that, like cracking or breaking shells or metal or structures and stuff like that. And then we've got the really cool one here, which is distance. We want to choose distance for this. Along with the distance comes a whole lot more settings down underneath here. The first thing I want to do is turn on my visualize binding and choose a color for that. I'm going to go ahead and choose, let's go with like a bright green or something for our visualize bindings and turn it on. You may need to kind of turn off the display and then turn the display back on in order to get the bindings to show up. But you'll see these little line armatures connecting particle to particle here. Those are your bindings. These particles are now glued together like a net. We can do a little bit, depending on how far apart they are. 5 looks actually fairly good. I can raise it to 10 to get a little bit more out of it. If your particles are a little too far away from each other, you might need to raise this even more. Let's see, actually I think the default of 5 is working pretty good because we've got these so nice and evenly spaced on this guy. We've also got the ability to tell it how many particles it's allowed to bind to. Right now it's set at 4. If I change this to 6, we get some of these crisscrosses. Let's change that again to 8. And then we get the double crisscross. So these particles are being bound all their neighbors in several different ways. Some of them aren't quite getting in there, so we will increase our binding distance and fill in so that we get this superb web of lime green bindings happening here. All right, that's going to bind all of our particles together. We're going to tell these particles that they should hold hands basically until something specific happens. And we're going to say that something specific is this breakable by force. When the force reaches a high enough level, we're going to tell them that they're allowed to let go of each other's hands. So, what level to choose? This is a very low. Let's kind of go with I don't know, 150 here to start, which is still fairly low value when we're kind of dealing with this. You can get pretty high up there. And that means that when the wind reaches a force level of this, it's strong enough to break those bindings. Further down a little ways more, we have the distance binding, which only comes along with, of course, the distance type up here. This one's going to be turned on. The maximum distance limit for these guys to kind of hang on to it is going to be relative to the particle distance, and it's going to allow it to kind of stretch to 120% before anything changes, before anything really happens. We've also got this wonderful stuff down here under our breakability to be allowed to break by overstretch. So when these particles get a certain distance away from each other, we can give it another level of breakage or allowed to be broken of our bonds. The first one is by force. So if the force of the wind hits them just right, powerful enough, they'll let go of their partner's hands. We can also say that if they get too far away from each other, they can let go of their partner's hands. I'm just going to go a little bit higher for the relative percent. We're going to double it to 300%. So 300% away from each other than they currently are positioned, and then after that they will let go and break apart. This number can be changed to get bigger chunks as this peel kind of starts to happen. The higher it goes, the bigger chunks you're going to have remain all the way back. The smaller this number goes, you're going to get more singular particles flying off with not a lot of space in the end. So I'll start out with a larger number so we can hopefully try and get some long and skinny and scrawny and straggly pieces of this guy. This is our first glue event. We're going to rename this guy to MP Glue Particle Glue or something along those lines, because we're gluing the particles to the particles. We also want to glue our particles to the surface of our collision object in the first event, and then they get allowed to let go in the second event. So let's grab another glue, put it up underneath that one. We can immediately rename that one. We can call it MP Glue to Collision or something along those lines. Again, we want the distance binding. we want to go ahead, we can turn that binding on. We can make it like, I don't know, pink, something obnoxious. And we're going to go ahead and visualize those bindings as well. We might get some override here. Let's go down a little ways here first. We've got the to bind with category here. We don't want binding with current event particles. We want it to bind with the deflector that we've got in our scene. Then we can go ahead and add that deflector, collision object. And then we'll start to see some of these little pink bindings between the particle and the collision object. So it's going to hold fast to there until we get through in here and they are allowed to let go. Similarly, we can do, depending on your bind distance, it looks like all of them are bound one little string to the collision object, so we probably don't need to change this too much. We don't need to add any more particles to bind, since this was not the event or the operator where they hold hands here like this. And you know, if you need to, you can increase the distance depending on how far away your collision object is to these particles, but ours looks pretty good, so I'll go ahead and leave it on 5. We also want them breakable by force. We can go ahead and match our other force, so I did 150. And we can come down here and similarly, we can go ahead and leave this default, turn on our breakable by overstretch, and we want these ones to break off and let go fairly easy, so we won't change it. We'll leave it at 150% there. Alright, we can go ahead and kind of see what's happening here now. If I scrub forward just a bit, now once they're activated, they start changing colors and start getting blown around a bit more. Oh, my computer's croaking on me here. But you can see that they're kind of holding hands quite a bit too much almost here, I think. So let's kind of back things up. We can do a couple of things for that. We can either increase the speed of our wind, either in this force we can kind of double this or something to an influence of 2,000% to try and get them to blow off the world a little bit better. But instead, let's try using a solvent here instead. And the solvent will allow these guys to let go when a certain thing happens. We can have it be an object passes through and breaks them themselves, or we can use that same texture there to kind of have that effect work as well. Another thing is on our MP world, either one of them, you may go down and check your advanced parameters down here. Our subframe factor has a lot to do with this. If it's higher, they're going to pay more close attention to reality and real physics. The lower this number is, probably the easier those are going to break. Let's not change this yet. Let's see what we can do. And let's add ourselves a solvent. We've got our world, we've got our force. Let's add an MP solvent up in underneath here, or at the very, let's go to the very top. Now this solvent, we've got some options here. So if I click my solvent, we've got the options over here. We can tell it to break the bindings from particles to particles, particles to the ground, or particles to the deflector. We just want to let go of the deflector when that texture kind of happens to allow these guys to let go a little easier and then give us some of that binding break. So I'm going to uncheck particles to ground and uncheck particles to particles. We can also come down here and we can do the solvent by a list. So when it finally gets here, the list of stuff that's allowed to let go will be right here for us. We can solve it by time, in other words, by frame 30 here or so, or between frame 80 and 100, etc. You are all allowed to let go. We can also limit the solvent by data, which gives us a data channel to use. We've got none in our data channel right now. We'd need to make one. We've already kind of created this in our data test. It's our color data change. So as it goes from black to white, we can also tell them to let go. We can use this, but we need to kind of create an extra channel so that we can use it down here in our solvent. Let's go back in by selecting our data test and the edit data flow. We'll go back in here. If I kind of take my output test out of there, something like that, we can add in a new function here. So we're going to add one of these output new down here that we'll be able to use throughout whatever we decide we want to use it in. This output new is going to be the data type not real. We need a Boolean. Okay, and that Boolean we can just kind of connect purple to purple, and we'll both get our output test for this guy and our output new to be used elsewhere. In fact, we can kind of rename this guy and call it our solvent output or something like that, and close that out. Back in our solvent, we can click that data channel, the limit solvent by data, and there's our solvent output that we can use here. With any luck, we'll be able to scrub forward in our timeline here a little bit, and that will both trigger the change as well as allow them to let go of that binding. Something is still hanging on there. Let's see. Well, I'm doing something wrong. Now my computer's freezing up on me because I got lots of actions happening here. Alright, let's bring you back up. Let's take a look at what we've got going on here. We might have... here we go. I see. So for our two different glues, we've got particle to particle and particle to collision. I put the same amount of force and torque, the breakable by force here. We want that to be something quite a bit lower. In fact, since they're all kind of hanging on quite a bit, let's reduce the glue to collision here to something like 20. And let's see. If we're getting there, we're starting to get some tearaway stuff going on. Perfect. And now we're starting to see these bindings kind of fly backwards and do their thing. So there we go. That's a little bit less of a steadfast hold on our collision object, which is our original sphere there. And that'll allow us to kind of continue on as soon as my computer lets me move. There we go. Okay. And heck, that's about it for our particle system. There's only one thing left remaining to do, and then it's just adjustments and fine-tuning. Let's go ahead down here to our remaining thing we have left to do, which is going to be we can actually, if you want to make this easier on yourselves, another thing that comes with these new particles are the ability to do some specific caching with these things. We can take our new cache disk operator, put it up underneath our render operator at the top, and let's tell it to viewport, use that viewport/render. We can come down to the bottom here. I can tell it to use a little bit more memory by kind of adding enough zeros to maximize my memory there. And then we've got this cache files select file button here, where we can find, let's see, a place. I think I already created a folder for this peel tutorial. There we go. For our particles, you want to create a folder for them. We'll call it our peel cache, and then hit the save button, and then hit the update button there. It might take a few minutes to run through here, but when it's finally done, you'll be able to scrub back and forth a lot easier in your viewport. So we'll give that a minute and see what happens here. Starting to rip, tear. We can see it happening as it's updating the viewport. Tear backwards and fly backwards, and we're getting some cool breaks on our glue bindings that we can see until, hey, look, all of our particles, for the most part, have let go and flown backwards at an enormous rate. The only thing to remember with this cache disk is that once you've cached it, everything you see from there on out as you scrub back and forth is a recording of all the movement. The particles are no longer thinking. They've been recorded and now they're just playing back, which is why it's a little easier on our computers. If you want to make any changes, you'll have to re-update this cache. So if we do want to decide we want to change the speed of the wind or how steadfast the bindings are being held, we will have to record that. But for right now, you can see that my computer's having almost no difficulty at all now letting these guys go and playing things back and forth. Let's move on to the last bit here. I'm going to minimize my particle view, and we're going to right-click and unhide by name our third sphere that we created and then immediately hid, which is our skin. The skin's got a lot more tessellated faces to it, and we're going to use that to get the final object to pay attention to these particles, which is all that ripping and tearing cloth-like stuff. We're going to go ahead and select it. Above our tessellate, we're going to add the particle skinner, a very cool modifier, to this guy. In our options down here, we are going to, don't activate it until you've got all your options done, but we're going to come down here to the Particle Flow Systems by List button, select our PF source, have it pay attention to all particle flow events. That's good. The next thing is the fall off, whether or not it's going to allow this to kind of skin rip and tear. You can increase that to get a little bit more of a change. We'll leave it default for right now. Our absolute at 10. You usually want this to be a little bit bigger than your original glue binding between the particles. So let's just up it to about 15 there. Your controller's limit, we can have that a little bit bigger, maybe 6. We want to come down here. What that does, I should explain a little bit, right? Is how many particles can control part of your skin or your cloth that's going to be allowed to rip. So if 2 particles are going the same direction, it can go together, or if they're separated, then we can have them fight for it, and you get some more pulling and ripping and tearing and stuff like that. The rip surface apart is where our magical stuff kind of happens a little bit more, for the tearing anyway. We have already decided on using a binding here, so we're going to set this type to binding break. You can also have it rip by a distance, how far apart they get pulled. You can change your relative. The higher this percentage is, the more exact it's going to rip on the edges of your polygons. So lower it down a little bit, 75 or 80 is going to get you a little bit more of a ragged look to it. It's allowed to tear pieces off rather than directly on the edge. You can get a little bit nicer in there. We also want to make sure that we remove the uncontrolled. So if a particle is not controlling a specific area, it'll get rid of it. And I think that's good to start. Let's go ahead and come back up to the top, click Activate Skinning, and we'll see what happens. Now our sphere is being kind of, yep, there it goes, torn, ripped, and shredded all the way down and out. We've got a couple that are hanging on there, but we can always kind of go through and adjust a little bit more as well. Maybe with our glue force, maybe we come down here. Let's see, what do we got going on here? Maybe 300, that's good. You can try reducing the amount of force it needs to break. 120. Recache our disk. Alright, so I changed a few things and re-updated our particle cache disk, and now we've got this skin kind of ripping and tearing and flying apart. Again, adjust to your liking, and that one's pretty much complete. With anything that comes involved with particle effects and heavy use of high poly stuff, I recommend a caching system. 3D Studio by itself doesn't have a great one, but we've got some others out there. I use ThinkBox XMesh, which if you go to your Create tab and you have these installed, under the geometry button, you've got under the think box, and you've got your XMesh loader. I've got mine set up here for the saver, and you'll basically kind of come in here, select your skin, it'll get added to the list, click the XMesh button, tell it where to save. I usually make another folder called the XMesh inside a project file, and then hit the big button down here at the bottom. When it's finished, you'll have a nice XMesh loader thing here that you can then add a couple new modifiers on, but it plays back to front quite a bit better, and your computer won't croak with all this stuff happening and going on in here. Then you can add a shell modifier, maybe another turbo smooth, and get kind of a serious, nicer looking peel going on there. But that is technically the end of our tutorial. So hopefully you learned something. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much with our new data operators and stuff like that.